Hello everybody and welcome back to Typical City. What is the Manchester City transfer policy? I'm asking you. I'm genuinely wondering. I'm curious. I don't know. What is the Manchester City transfer policy moving forward? Get in the chat below. I really want to get a general idea of what the Man City fans' opinions are on how we should approach the transfer market with so many little caveats to take into consideration that I'm going to bring to the attention of you guys in this video. Subscribe while you're in the chat as well. At the end of the video, I want to hear all of your thoughts as to how we approach this going forward and what we need to factor in. So the first point I wanted to factor in is Pep Guardiola. I think that's the first point, and how it's really going to hinder how the club, Cheeky Bergenstein or Ferran Soriano, whoever's involved in the negotiations, all of the player side of things, the agent side of things, are going to be a case of, is Pep going to be there? For this year, yes. So that's guaranteed 1 year of Pep Guardiola's tutelage. Fantastic. That'll mean to some, 1 year is a lifetime of knowledge. But really, especially if you're the likes of João Neves, which has been linked, a younger player, let's just say generally, a young player in 20s, 19-year-old player that we're looking at signings, let's say. And if Pep Guardiola's saying, I'm going to be here for 1 year, that's not going to convince them as a young player. They're going to say, oh, I want 2 or 3 years, at least 2 or 3 years of Pep Guardiola, and that will be problem solved. So is that something City need to do? Do we need to attack Pep Guardiola? Not literally, just like, fucking sign that contract, you bastard. None of that. Just sign up Pep Guardiola for 2 more years, maybe 3 would be absolutely unbelievable. If we can persuade him to stay for 2 or 3 more years, that would be absolutely insane. And that would make the transfer market going forward for this summer smooth sailing. Pretty much anyone we want, we could sign. I would say that even the young players getting the idea of 3 years of Pep Guardiola teaching you the tricks of the trade, Pep's trade, and it's wow, yes please, sign the dotted line, yes please, thank you very much. Now, if it's just 1 year, you are going to question, aren't you? You're going to say, well, I don't know where my future lies, because who's the next manager going to be? What are his ideologies? What's he going to bring to the table? What's he going to teach me? Is he going to favour me? Is he going to prefer a completely different style of play that doesn't suit me? That's questions all these players are going to want answering. Now, if we can get that Pep sorted, then smooth sailing going forward. The next point and question, again, get in the comments below. How do you think we approach this? Who are we trying to take on? Globally, for me, it's Real Madrid. That's the club that Manchester City are looking at. We used to target United and Arsenal and Liverpool, those big red clubs in the UK. We'd look at them and think that's the target. 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years ago, we were looking up at them in awe, thinking we've got to take them on. That's the challenge now. Baby steps, climbing up. Champions League football, win a Premier League title, win more than 1 Premier League title, and then trebles. And before you know it, we're looking down at Liverpool, United, and Arsenal, and they're trying to emulate us. I still believe that Manchester City as a football club are still, that's the target, is Real Madrid. Globally, brand-wise, commercially, that's the target. On the pitch, I think we could beat Real Madrid, and I think we did beat them when we won the treble, and we were very, very unlucky last season in getting knocked out on penalties. So, on the pitch, I don't see a problem against Real Madrid. It's in the transfer market, it's in the brand side of things. If you can factor in Real Madrid and how they used to, maybe not so much nowadays, even to this transfer market, they've signed Kylian Mbappe. So do you know what I mean? I don't see City doing that sort of transfer policy of going for these blockbuster names. And don't tell me you wouldn't like to have Kylian Mbappe at Manchester City, because you would rather have a young player that may become a Kylian Mbappe, but we can brag about how cheap we got him. That's the topic of this video really right there, is how do you want City to approach this? Because while we've done incredibly well in signing these, not young players, some middling players, some aging players, the likes of Manuel Akanji for 15 bloody million. And what an absolute superstar he is. I mean, he's not aging, but he's entering into his 30s soon. We're targeting Joshua Kimmich, another player that's 29 years old, getting close to 30. We might not have to break the bank for him, and we can brag about potentially how cheap we got him, excluding his wages, of course, which sounds like that's a whole other topic. His wage structure right now at Manchester City is very topical, and we've got to be careful in disturbing the balance and the ecosystem of who's earning what, with Foden looking at getting 300k, Haaland getting what he deserves. Kevin De Bruyne being the top big dog earner, we've got to factor in those small details of wages as well. But competing with Real Madrid, are we going to go out there and spend 100 million, 150 million? Because I think there's only ever been one massive mistake from Manchester City, and that's Jack Grealish. The price of Jack Grealish, not the player. I thought the player in the treble-winning season was a vital component to our treble-winning campaign. Hugely successful season for Jack Grealish when we won the treble. He didn't get enough credit for his contribution in that season. Now he's being lambasted and absolutely slaughtered by our own as well. A lot of Manchester City fans. Last season, I agree that he did not have a good season last season. Injuries played its part. He was nowhere near good enough when he was fit and when he was playing, though. Nowhere near good enough. And we need to see the arrival of Jeremy Doku as well. And that's another side of the transfer policy that I'm talking about. Pep Guardiola being factored in once again, because he often changes Pep Guardiola. His tactics come into play. So if you're surplus to requirements, which is starting to look like Jack Grealish is, do players now want to factor that in when they're signing for Manchester City? It's like, well, you want me now, and I suit your system for the upcoming season, but what are you doing next season? What are you doing for the season after that? Because we've gone back to the attacking wingers role again, and that's another factor that these players are going to want answering. You know, so these little details, and I just don't see City going into the market for £100 million player and spending it. And because we saw the Gvardiol transfer saga last year. So many people in the comments when I was talking about the Josko Gvardiol deal of last season were saying, just pay it. Just pay it. We've got the money. Just pay it. And I thought, well, I actually appreciate what City are doing. I like the idea of buying a player, not on the cheap because we paid 70 million for him, but they were asking for 100 million euros to begin with. We chipped away, kept chipping away, and got him down to 70 million in the end. And it was absolutely hats off to Cheeky Bergenstein for getting Gvardiol, who's starting to look, especially at the end of last season, and his Euro campaign looked pretty decent as well. Every penny, worth it. So it's going to be interesting. Now, whether City can pay for it or will pay for it it's two separate things, because the PSR rules are being factored in now. The Premier League spending caps or rules that are in place now. One, what are they going to be next year? Because PSR is a whole different ball game every year. They change the rules year in, year out, which is just an example of the absolute shit show that the Premier League is to begin with. And are City being hindered by it? I'm not sure they are, because comparing us to the rest of the Premier League, the likes of Manchester City can now outspend everybody, including United and Liverpool and Arsenal and all those big money earners that tell us how much money they earn from sponsorships and things like that. We now earn more commercially and just generally earn more from revenue, transfer sales, commercial revenue. We are the top earners in the Premier League and almost the top earners in the world from a football club point of view. Competing with Real Madrid, we pip them to it. But can we attract the players yet that Real Madrid? Because I still think it's a dream for most players to play for Real Madrid. It'll take a decade of Manchester City to earn that respect for upcoming kids when we're all 10 years from now. I wonder if I'm still going to be here in 10 years. I mean, on this channel at least. I hope I'm still alive in 10 years. That would be ideal. But what are they going to be thinking? Is it going to be like, oh, it was a dream of mine to play for Manchester City, and seeing the likes of Erling Haaland posters on all the children's walls, you know, in their bedrooms and things like that? Are they going to start looking at Manchester City as the club to play for? Right now, rival fans will say, they'll laugh at us for saying that. They won't be laughing in 10 years, though. If we continue the way we do it, City will be the club to play for. We already signed the likes of Kevin De Bruyne. Real Madrid want Kevin De Bruyne. No chance. You're not getting him. When we signed Aguero, we had him for 10 years. Every single summer transfer window, Aguero to Real Madrid, Aguero to Barcelona. He never went. We kept him as long as we wanted him. Because they don't want to leave. Because you win trophies, you get paid very well for doing it, and you can play some of the best football in the world. Why would you want to leave? Only the weather, really. Family situations, circumstantial situations are the only reason to not play in Manchester versus Madrid. Geographical reasons, I understand that. Yeah, not the greatest weather over here. Other than that, footballing reasons, we are pretty on par with Real Madrid when it comes to those. But we've just got that heritage to earn. We have to earn our right, and you don't do that overnight. You don't do that with one treble. You do it beating Real Madrid year in, year out. That's how you do it. We've got to keep doing it. And that's the long-term effect for Manchester City. So do you want to go down the road of spending £100 million and competing with Real Madrid in that regard, and like they used to sign Gareth Bale from Spurs, and Cristiano Ronaldo from United. Like we're not that club. We don't sell to Real Madrid. We want to be that level of club. We want to buy the best players in the world. But do we want to buy them when they're ready-made, or do we want to buy them when they're 2 or 3 years away from being ready-made and allow Pep Guardiola, and we're back to Pep Guardiola again, for him to work his magic and make them those superstars? Kevin De Bruyne was signed actually by Pellegrini, wasn't he? But Pep Guardiola, and I mean, arguably Kevin De Bruyne did it himself. It seemed like the trajectory for Kevin De Bruyne was of his own making. I think he would have made it to a top-class player, whichever manager was looking after him. But having Pep Guardiola is that extra, that pulling factor. So it's going to be interesting to see if we do break that mould. I don't think we will. It seems like we've got a war chest that we are hanging on to right now. So get in the chat below, subscribe while you're there, and let me know if you agree with that, or would you rather see City just go for it now? Musiala, 120 million? Here you go, mate. We'll have him. No problem. Wirtz, 150 million? Pay it up. I think we could do that. Maybe not both in the same transfer window. We can afford to do these big transfer market deals now, but I'm not sure the club will. And it comes back to Pep Guardiola again. We've got to sign him to a new contract to teach these players and let them know when they're in the negotiation side of things that he's going to be here or he's not going to be here. Then the other side of things is the City Football Group. Is this the new policy? Are we now looking at a new way? Because you're looking at Jan Couto, for example, that we're supposedly interested in. Someone who I would really like City to sign. Very, very attack-minded. But an amazing future. An amazing future. We've already signed Savio. So there's 2 top prospects that we're signing and saving money in the process. And potentially top quality players could be playing in the first team of Manchester City very soon. Savio being definitely one of them, and potentially Jan Couto. Is that the model we want to go for? Because we're seeing other clubs adopt multi-club ownerships. United are already doing it with the Ineos. Even clubs like Crystal Palace have multi-club ownerships. They've allowed Girona and Manchester City to play in the Champions League. So these rules of no clubs being owned by the same ownerships, they seem very flexible on these rules. If it was just City doing it, there is no way that level of flexibility would be afforded to Manchester City. But if every club wants to do it, then they're going to have to show a little bit of leeway, And that's what's going to happen. And Girona and Manchester City, they're in the Champions League next season. So it's going to be interesting to see if City continue down that road of, because it's effectively a second club that we can use, because outside of Girona, and this brings us back to the next point I wanted to make, was the academy. And is that the policy that we want to go down? Because we've already seen, obviously, Phil Foden. Who is the next Phil Foden? Arguably, it was going to be Cole Palmer. I don't agree with the price that we sold him for, but it seemed like we had to sell him. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be at City. We couldn't promise him the football that he wanted. He was going to get that elsewhere. He isn't going to go to La Liga, to Girona. He never wanted to leave the country. So we had to sell him. And the price looks way too cheap now, and that's in hindsight, because he went and did incredibly well at Chelsea. Fair play to him. But now we're looking at the next Phil Foden. You've got your Rico Lewis's and Oscar Bob, who spent a bit of time in the academy as well, coming through players. Who is the next Phil Foden? And constantly looking for that standard of player. But you look at the academy in 2 ways for me. You look at it as player generating and money generating. So from a player point of view, you're looking at 1%, maybe less. 1% of those players are going to be good enough to make it into the Manchester City first team. Less than 1%. The amount of players that come through the academy. So then there's those fringe players that are in the 5% that are really top quality. Now you're entering into a decision, forks in the road, where you need to decide what to do with them. Are they good enough potentially for first team? There's a little, like your James McAtee, go to Sheffield United on loan. Loaning players out here and there, potentially. Girona is a really good option, especially for players that are not English or British, that are more willing to travel and go to Spain and play in La Liga. Outside of Girona or loaning to Championship or Premier League clubs, even with this system, we're quite limited. Because we don't want to sell them to, because we don't want to sell them to the MLS or to Melbourne, to places like that, because they're not going to play the same standard of football. We've got French teams in second division clubs. We've got Belgian teams in the second division. That's for a different category of player. Those players that are good enough for the first team of Manchester City, or potentially good enough for the first team of Manchester City, you don't want to sell them, or loan them rather, to French second division or Belgium second division, because they're not going to get tested. You want to test them. Girona is really our second club now, where we can send them out to La Liga, Champions League now. What an amazing season it was for Girona. If they can continue that, play Champions League football, and continue to get into the top four of La Liga, then we've got an absolute pool of players that we could utilise effectively and generate players that way that can play for Manchester City if they're good enough. Savio being the first one. Is that the road we're going down? But then it goes back to the academy again, and if they're not good enough, you've got your James Traffords, your Liam Delaps, and all these players that were like, oh, I'd like them to play for City, but they're just not good enough, unfortunately. Cha-ching. And we make a load of money on them. And then you start looking at then it comes back to Cole Palmer and said, did we make enough money on them? Because we only sold him for 40 plus million, and now he's looked more than double that, considering what he's done in a Chelsea shirt. It's a really interesting topic for me, and I think we're going down an interesting road right now, City and the Premier League, because of the PSR rules. So I really want to know your thoughts, Blues. How would you like City to approach the transfer market, factoring in Pep Guardiola's contract, factoring in the PSR rules, factoring in who we want to emulate, the likes of Real Madrid? Should we be going in for £100 million players? And yes, I know most fans will say, well, yeah, because it's not my money. Of course you don't care. But do we need to factor in keeping deals on the cheap and then promoting them that way? Get in the comments below, let us know your thoughts, Blues. Like and subscribe to Typical City, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is Typical City now, holding up silver.